Should I be worried about 5G? There's a lot of scary stuff about that on the internet, isn't there? And in fact, only the other day somebody gave me a leaflet about it. And it says on here that 5G is the next generation of mobile phone carrier technology operating at higher frequencies to deliver faster downloads and reduce latency, which sounds marvellous, doesn't it? Except that it goes on to say that there are proven health problems from microwave radiation, including brain tumours, cancers, insomnia, headaches, tinnitus, nosebleeds. Well, the list goes on and it's very frightening, so let's not look at that too much. It reminded me because my dad, I think I've mentioned this before, my father used to work in aerials. He used to make and manufacture aerials as his living. He ran his own company. Now, when I say aerials, I don't mean television aerials, although he did do a couple of those, but his main thing was all sorts of other marine aerials and special police covert aerials. So in other words, they would put an aerial perhaps into a torch and leave it on the parcel shelf of a car with a transmitter so they could perhaps earwig into something. We're talking in the 1970s and 80s, so it was a long time ago. They probably operate completely differently now. He also did tracking aerials in which if you were tracking wildlife, you could, out there in the jungle, you could see where a certain animal, if it had a little collar on it or this aerial transmitter fixed onto it. So he was into aerials. And growing up, I wasn't really that bothered about aerials, wasn't my sort of thing, but I did glean from him a little bit about how aerials work and how radio waves, more particularly, operated. And I thought I would just share you what I know. Now, I may have got this all wrong. Technology's moved on. It may be very different, but I've just share with you what I know because it might be of interest. So do you remember the old long wave? In the old days, back when you had the BBC going, "This is the BBC Home Service," or the Light programme. They were broadcast on long wave back in the 1940s. Great big transmitter, say at Crystal Palace, pushing out this what they called a long wave. Now, long wave, this is a wave, a radio wave, and it went like this. It sort of went up and down like in a wave on the ocean, if you like, going up and down like that. But very long, low-powered, still radiation, but so low you wouldn't even notice it, had no harmful effect. And we've had this for years, and we know that it's perfectly safe. Now, the way that radio would work, if you had that broadcast, there was a man behind the microphone at the BBC going, "This is the BBC Home Service." That would be turned into a signal. The signal would sit, as I understand it, on the radio wave. So you've got the wave, let's call that like the sea, and then the signal would sit on it like a boat or a series of boats. And you hear what's in the boat, as in the bloke talking from the BBC, and the wave is just the carrier. Now, you're probably more familiar with medium wave back in the days when you could get FM and things like that. And you'd be in your car and you'd listen to all sorts of things as you're travelling around, or you'd have a little tranny, and by tranny, I mean a transistor radio, by the way. And you'd sit there perhaps on the beach listening to whatever the Beatles' latest album was and that sort of thing. And that would be on medium wave. And the thing about medium wave is you would have not just one or two big transmitters, you'd have slightly smaller transmitters, and they would be closer together, about 20 or 30 miles apart. So if you were travelling across the country, radio stations would only be able to transmit so far because they were attached to one or two transmitters, and then you would have to go into somebody else's region. So that was medium wave, same principle and everything else, just slightly smaller, still very safe. Then you had shortwave. You may remember there were enthusiasts who used to love to listen to programmes across the world. They could only really do that on shortwave because shortwave was smaller waves, not like microwaves, still much, much bigger than microwaves. But the thing about shortwaves and all radio waves is they're going out in straight lines like this. But you're listening to something in, say, Australia, on the other side of the world. So how did it get to you? Well, the thing about shortwaves is the frequency of which the wave was, it would go up into the atmosphere, and I forget what layer it is, one of the stratospheres in there. It would bounce off that and come back down. As it would bounce around, you could pick up signals from, say, Australia or China or Indonesia or wherever it was. So you could tune in, you see. So that was how shortwaves worked. Now, then we get into the next generation of transmission and transmitting data that we know of, and that's 3G and 4G, and then this 5G that's going to be rolled out. 3G and 4G, which we use on our mobile phones all the time, of course, they're the same sort of principle, but the radio signal, or rather the radio wave, is very much smaller. Now, of course, in order to, like with medium wave, you still need lots of transmitters, but you'll know, if you know about cellular networks, there are lots of these transmitters all over the place. I think something like 3 or 4 miles apart. So there's a huge network of mobile phone transmitters all over the place. Your town might have 2 or 3, depending on the size of the town. I may have got some of these figures a little bit wrong, but just bear with me. The principle, I'm sure, is pretty accurate. So that's on 3G and 4G, and the thing about having a smaller radio wave is that you can put more data on it, particularly the digital data, so that you can download your movies and you can download your WhatsApp messages and send emails and all of that on these shorter wavelengths. Now, the thing about the 5G is that even shorter now, much shorter. It's microwave. Now, I don't know who invented the microwave, but it's a clever invention using these tiny waves. A microwave might be a millimetre. So instead of a long wave being like this, you know, nice, gentle, sloping, sweeping thing, these are really tiny, going up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down like this. Very close together. From a millimetre, I think it to be a microwave under a foot, or 30 centimetres, 300 millimetres, something like that. So really like that. Now, in a microwave that you heat your food up, you need quite a bit of power. You put the power, I believe, in watts, and that can heat your food up. Now, if they're going to use microwaves to transmit data, and so you can stream things so much quicker, I don't know how many times quicker it is from 3G and 4G, but it's drastically quicker, so you can download a movie in a few seconds rather than perhaps a few minutes. It means that these waves are this tiny little waves, and you need some energy, but not as much power as you would with a microwave, of course, because you're not trying to fry anybody's brains. You're just trying to get enough data across. However, the signals, or the transmitters rather, they have to be, you need many more of them. Just as every aerial that we've talked about, you needed more and more, because the ability of the radio wave to get further is limited because you've reduced the size of the wave. So these microwaves will need to be something like between 100 and 300 meters apart, which means they're going to be in the streets all over the place, because people will want to be in the towns and cities downloading their data and transmitting their video files and whatever it is, and millions of people will want to be doing this all at the same time. So they're going to need millions of these little transmitters broadcasting microwaves. Oh, and by the way, all these radio waves have a certain ability to get round objects. Long wave has no problem at all because it's a long sweeping wave and you can get it all over the place. Medium wave, as you remember, if you went through a tunnel it would cut out a little bit, or if you were in a built up area, certain big hills and things, your radio signal would disappear. As you get further and smaller, these radio waves will need line of sight, so your roads will have to have all the trees removed, otherwise it won't work. You'll get blockages, or they'll need more transmitters to get around all the trees and all the blockages and lampposts and buildings and everything else. So you're going to need thousands of these things transmitting microwaves. All of that is radiation, and the smaller the wavelength, the more radiation. Even at a lower power, it's still going to be radiating. The problem that I think there is going to be for the human body, firstly, is we've never had a situation in which so many radio waves, microwaves, are being transmitted 24/7 all the time. And I don't suppose we've had a test over 5 or 10 years to see what problems might arise from the body. So that whilst this leaflet says there might be all these things, brain tumours, cancers, insomnia, headaches and so on, and it goes, there's a whole load of things. That could well be true because we just don't know. Now, I'm saying we don't know, and I don't want to put out any misinformation. If there is knowledge about this, I would love to know it. But I do know from what my dad used to tell me about the radiation, the smaller the radiation, the closer the transmitters have got to be. And we know what happens in a microwave. Well, imagine that process, but at a much low level over 2, 3 or 10 years. It's got to be doing some damage, hasn't it? I would love to know more about this. So if you can fill me in, I would want to read it in the comments. So should I be worried about 5G? I'm beginning to think that maybe I should.